Coming up on Business Daily, Nigeria's public debt rises by 12.6 trillion naira in 3 months on naira depreciation. Nigeria to begin vehicle spare parts production. And the UK Premier vows to defend budget decisions amid anger from farmers over tax changes. Hello, welcome to Business Daily on LN24/7. It's great to have you join us. I am Amaka Daniels. We start off in the news where President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has commended robust bilateral relations between Nigeria and India. The president gave the commendation at the opening of the bilateral and political talks between him and India's Prime Minister, stating that Nigeria intends to spur renewed cooperation with them in all sectors as it will facilitate collaboration between the two countries to maintain and strengthen relations. During the visit, both leaders witnessed the exchange of signed memoranda of understanding on cultural exchange programs, cooperation in customs matters, and collaborations between Surveyor Generals of India and Nigeria. President Tinubu commended Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi for his favorable disposition towards a renewed vision of mutually beneficial bilateral relations. Now, the two leaders also expressed optimism that the outcomes of the visit would herald a new era in Nigeria-India relations. In another development, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Sunday left Nigeria for Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, to attend the 19th meeting of the G20 Leaders Summit. Now, the summit, holding from Monday, November 18 to Tuesday, 19, will bring together leaders from the world's top 20 economies, including the European Union, the African Union, and multilateral financial institutions, among others. Now, this year's meeting under the theme, Building a Just World and a Sustainable Planet, will see the participants discuss the fight against hunger and poverty, reform the institution of global governance and sustainable development, and energy transition. Nigeria's President Tinubu, who was accompanied by some top government officials, is expected to also hold bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the summit in advancement of Nigeria's socio-economic reforms. Foreign inflows into the Nigerian Exchange Limited declined to the lowest point of the year at 11.26 billion naira in September. Now, this is according to the latest domestic and foreign portfolio investment report of the NGX. The report indicated that as foreign inflows weakened, foreign investors increased the amount of their investments that they liquidated between August and September. Foreign inflow into Nigeria in the first 9 months of 2024 stood at 310.99 billion naira, higher than 108.93 billion naira in 2023. The highest value of the inflow was recorded in May 2024, which stood at 54.87 billion naira, and it has steadily declined since then to 11.26 billion naira in September. Now, in terms of foreign outflows, it also worsened to 30.15 billion naira in September compared to 24.38 billion naira in August. Experts have noted that the unstable naira and high interest rates environment were making investors abandon the equity market in search of better yields. And moving on to our focus for today, the recent data published by the Debt Management Office revealed Nigeria's public debt stock surged by 12.6 trillion naira between March and June 2024 amid continued depreciation of the naira, which has remained pressured despite the CBN's effort to shore up the local currency. Now, analysts believe that the modest rise in Nigeria's public debt stock, which puts the total debt at 134.3 trillion naira, was driven by two factors. Number one, the depreciation of the naira, which added about 5.9 trillion naira to the total debt stock, and the country's fresh borrowings from the domestic market. Now, a further probe into the DMO's data also revealed that Nigeria has as much as 63 trillion naira, which is roughly $43 billion, as its foreign debt, which is accounting for 47% of the total debt stock. The federal government of Nigeria took the lion's share, borrowing approximately 56 trillion naira, while the 36 states plus the Federal Capital Territory has 7 trillion naira as their external debt. The Nigeria's debt stock has grown from 53% recorded in the first quarter of 2024 to 58% in the second quarter of 2024, defying the DMO's self-imposed public debt ceiling of 40%, as outlined in the agency's medium-term debt management strategy. Now, with this rising public debt stock, the debt-to-service ratio will definitely increase. Is this a welcoming development for the country's economy at this time? Joining us to discuss this now is Faiz Mohammed, a public policy and economic analyst. Many thanks for joining us on the show, Mr. Faiz. All right, so what was your initial reaction to this development and this news?
Well, a sharp increase in Nigeria's public debt highlights serious systemic economic vulnerabilities, particularly were effects of the exchange rate depreciation, and we're also seeing what happens when you have unsustainable borrowing practices. More than anything, this shows us why it's very urgent for us to start discussing fiscal reforms on a national level. For a long time, we've been dependent on external, also borrowing from domestic partners, specifically within financial institutions within the country. The problem with being over reliant on borrowing is that it eventually leaves you with very little room for flexibility with regards fiscal finance, and particularly when the debt to service ratio is very high, you're going to be in a situation whereby you are using the majority of income service debt. And I think that's the debt trap that Nigeria currently finds itself in.
And what do you have to say about Nigeria's current borrowing culture? I mean, it's something that is quite worrisome for everyone. What do you have to say about Nigeria's borrowing culture, and do you see an end to this anytime soon?
I didn't get that question.
I said, what do you have to say about Nigeria's borrowing culture right now? It's something that's quite worrisome for everyone. Do you see an end to this anytime soon?
So, like I said, put of ourselves in a little bit of a debt trap. Excessive borrowing corresponding economic or investment strategies often leads us to this situation where your assets are not generating enough to service the debt that you've accrued. And that means that we're going to see reduced fiscal flexibility and an increasing risk of default, especially now that our debt to service ratio is well over 100% yesterday. Means that unless there is some sort of very, very change, it's very difficult to see where that change would come from in the way that we revenue and the way that we generate income in this country on a national level. To see continued not yet, because debts have to be serviced. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that, seeing as how high the debt profile is currently, is to continue to borrow.
Okay, and do you see the increased inflation and exchange rate, depreciation affecting the ability of Nigeria to service its foreign debts?
Certainly, I mean, the depreciation era is really the main reason that we're in this situation to begin with. Coupled with inflation, that makes foreign debt servicing much more expensive, which of course leads to straining of public finances, and the weakening of the naira amplifies limiting the amount of spending that can go into infrastructure or social programs. So really, in terms of stability, what this level of is showing us is that the more debt that we're accruing, the harder it is for us to effectively govern the nation through sustained and astute fiscal policy.
Okay, and now speaking on foreign investment attractiveness, how do you see the rising debt burden affecting Nigeria's credit rating for investors, and how would you advise the central bank and the federal government to, bring in more investment and have them look past our rising debt?
So I think there are two problems with this. The rising debt signals to potential investors a certain level of instability, and that affects Nigeria's credit rating. It affects the ease of doing business rating on the worldwide scale, and that discourages foreign investors and increases borrowing costs. The ease of business doing index is something that a foreign investor would look at to be able to judge whether or not a country like Nigeria is somewhere that they would be wise to spend their money on. But when you have such a volatile fiscal structure, and when the main source of government, rather than it being a diversified economic pool where there are different revenue streams from across different economic sectors bringing money into the country, now you're in a situation where you're financing the government itself primarily through external debt borrowing. And very few foreign investors are going to look at that and think that that is a stable environment in which to invest long term. So I think it's going to have a negative effect on the way that foreign businesses, especially, look at Nigeria. As far as advice, I think there are three things. The first one, I think the government has already thought about. If you remember, over the past week, there's been a lot of talk about a fiscal reform bill that is in front of the National Assembly. Tax reforms are very important. Expanding the tax base while simplifying tax structures will increase compliance and hopefully increase the amount of revenue that's going to government. But also, it's important to note that when that revenue does come through, how does the government invest it? What does it invest it in? It has to be something sustainable. It has to be something that is going to bring in revenue into the country. It also is really important that the government start thinking about fiscal discipline. There's too much overspending, whether that is on government finances, whether it's on foreign trips, whether it's on the salaries of lawmakers and governing officials. I think there's too much being spent in several government programs without too much follow through and without the requisite buy-in. One of the arguments of the government also is that it wants to eliminate wasteful subsidies. While those subsidies are now gone, it hasn't done really anything to help inflation within the country. And the reason for that is because we don't have diversified revenue streams, which is the third piece of advice that I would give. You have to prioritize non-oil revenue sources, particularly agriculture, manufacturing, and technology. Without diversifying Nigeria's economic base such that you have a lot of income coming in from different sectors, employing a large part of the population, particularly with regards to manufacturing, it's going to be difficult to get out of this current debt trap that the country finds itself in.
Okay, now let me ask you personally, Mr. Faiz, what do you think? Do you see Nigeria's debt profile reducing anytime soon, let's say the next 5 to 10 years? And if it does, what are some of the economic indicators that we should look out for?
It's very difficult. Whether or not Nigeria's debt profile decreases in the coming years depends very heavily upon what policies this government decides to institute. Besides what decisions they make with regards to the policies they want to institute, how do they implement them? Is there enough follow through? What are the incentives for another government that comes to. The truth is, this sort of economic reform requires anywhere between 6 to 8 years for us to see actual change, sometimes up to 10 years. So if there's another government that comes in at the end of the day, what is going to incentivize that new government to continue with these reforms? Because not doing so is another level of instability, another level of fiscal volatility that both the country and foreign investors are going to look at and think that this country isn't a sure bet. I do think that it's going to take a while, anywhere between 5 to 6 years, before we start to see a real reduction. And that will depend on how well the government institutes new economic reforms, specifically with regards to diversifying our economic revenue streams. There has to be serious investment in manufacturing, very serious investment in infrastructure, especially when it comes to power. And without those particular reforms over a long period of time, it's going to be difficult for us to see a reduction in the level of borrowing and the level of debt within the main thing to look out for would be a decrease in inflation and a stabilization of the Naira's value. Currently, it's still a little bit volatile. It moves anywhere between 1.6, 1.7, 1.5 at any time of the week. When you see it become very stable, when you see it decrease, that is a good indicator that either the economic reforms are working or that we have found a level playing field through which the country is comfortable enough growing from that point on.
All right, we'll look forward to that and to a increase in the government improving other sectors aside the Nigeria's oil sector and generally technology sector, agriculture, so that we can, start to generate more revenue and bring down our current debt profile. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Business Daily, Mr. Faiz. It's always great to have you.
Thank you very much.
You're still watching Business Daily. Before we go on a break, amid anger from farmers over inheritance tax charges, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer seemed to still stiff on decisions made. Now, we'll bring you more details right after this break. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still watching Business Daily, and it's good news for Nigeria as the National Automotive Design and Development Council, the NADDC, says it has put in place the necessary structures and frameworks to begin the manufacturing of 10 essential vehicle spare parts locally, a move the council believes will help reduce the country's dependence on spare parts imports, which currently gobs about $1 billion annually. Now, the NADDC Director General, Joseph Osanipin, according to a statement disclosed at an event to conclude a 2-week training of auto engineers and software automotive design in Abuja, the DG, represented by the Directorate of Research, Design and Development, Fidelis Achieve, noted that the council is ready to produce spare parts for over 11 million vehicles plying the Nigerian roads. He also added that the council is working to achieve a local assembly component of 40% from less than 1% assembling capacity currently in Nigeria. According to the DG, the current method of assembling vehicles in Nigeria is not adding much value to the economy as the vehicles come in completely built, but according to him, and I quote, "We want to transform from that to a level where these vehicles come in unpainted, the welding is done here, some component parts are produced here, the assembly will add more value and employ more people," end quote. Moving on to Africa, authorities in South Africa have put together a team including mine rescue experts to come up with a plan to bring to surface illegal miners. A government delegation led by the police minister, Senzo Muchunu, visited the site and engaged with the community and relatives of the miners who remain under a disused gold mine in a town southwest of Johannesburg. The minister added that they had been advised that the mine shaft was 2,500 meters deep and that an intervention was very dangerous. He added that his team is also very wary of the fact that the miners may be heavily armed.
We need a much more quicker process because it is risky and dangerous for them to remain where they are for a longer period. Now, in order to achieve that, not only do we need the multiplicity of agencies here, as it is the case at the moment, including South African National Defence Force, but we need the community. We need their understanding, we need their cooperation, but we need their willingness to come across challenges.
Well, it is important to note that officials have closed entrances to the mine shaft used to bring these illegal miners food, water, and other basic necessities as part of the government's strategy to force them to return to the surface and be arrested. Still in Africa, the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications has reported that telecommunications companies contributed 9.83 billion cedis in taxes and other payments in 2023, marking a substantial boost to the country's national revenue. Now, this contribution reflects a remarkable 50% increase over the 6.5 billion cedis paid in 2022. These figures were detailed in the Transparency Initiative report jointly released by the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications and the Electronic Money Issuers Chamber of Ghana. Beyond financial contributions, the telecommunications sector generated 2,464 direct jobs in 2023, slightly lower than the 2,600 jobs created in 2022. At the report's launch in Accra, Dr. Kenneth Ashigbe, CEO of the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications, highlighted the industry's dedication to fostering economic growth. Despite ongoing challenges, he affirmed that the telecommunications sector's role as a cornerstone of Ghana's economic development. And on the global scene, UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said that he would defend the decisions made in the budget all day long amid anger from farmers over inheritance tax charges. Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced last month in her key speech that from April 2026, farms worth more than €1 million will face an inheritance tax rate of 20% rather than the standard 40% applied to other land and property. The announcement has sparked anger among farmers who previously did not have to pay any inheritance tax and argue that a change will mean higher food prices, lower food production, and having to sell off lands to pay. While farmers were holding a tractor protest outside a Labour conference in North Wales, where Kerr was to give his first speech as Prime Minister, he defended the budget, saying, and I quote, "We've taken some extremely tough decisions on tax. I would defend facing up to the harsh light of fiscal reality. I would defend the tough decisions that were necessary to stabilize our economy," end quote. Well, that's all we have for you today on Business Daily. Don't forget, you can join the conversation via our social media handles and visit our content hub at www.ln247.news for more business news and updates. I am Amaka Daniels. Many thanks for watching.